At my granddaughter's engagement party, the guest card on my seat read, "The old shrew who always ruins everything." On Monday, her honeymoon reservation was canceled. By me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The ballroom of the Eastwood Country Club sparkled with champagne flutes and designer dresses, the perfect setting for my granddaughter Amber's engagement celebration. At 66, I'd learned to navigate these family gatherings with a practiced smile, despite the undercurrent of tension that had defined my relationship with my daughter Caroline for decades. "Mom, your table is over there," Caroline said, barely glancing my way as she fussed with Amber's hair. Even at 42, my daughter still carried herself with the brittle defensiveness she'd developed as a teenager. I nodded, clutching my small purse as I made my way through the crowd. Distant relatives and friends of the young couple parted before me, their smiles fading slightly as they recognized me. I'd grown accustomed to being the family outsider, though it never stopped hurting. The table was at the far corner of the room, set slightly apart from the others. I approached it slowly, my knees aching from arthritis that had worsened over the past winter. That's when I saw it. The place card sitting in front of what was clearly meant to be my seat. "The old shrew who always ruins everything." I blinked, certain I'd misread it. But no. The words remained, elegantly printed on the same cream cardstock as all the other place settings. My hands began to tremble as I stared at those words, each one a deliberate knife. "Do you like it?" Amber's voice came from behind me, sweet with triumph. I turned to face my granddaughter, trying to compose my expression. She stood there in her engagement dress, blue eyes, so like her grandfather's, gleaming with satisfaction. "I thought it was fitting." "Amber." My voice sounded strange, distant. "Why would you—" "Oh, Grandma, don't start making a scene." She rolled her eyes, looking so much like Caroline at that moment that my chest ached. "It's just a joke." Mom thought it was hilarious. Of course she did. Caroline had spent most of her life painting me as the villain in her story, and now she'd passed that narrative to my granddaughter. I carefully picked up the place card and slipped it into my purse. "I'll just take a seat," I said quietly. "Whatever," Amber shrugged, already turning away to greet more welcome guests. "Just try not to ruin my engagement party like you ruin everything else." I sat down at the empty table, the chatter and laughter of the party continuing around me as if nothing had happened. No one came to join me. I'd been deliberately isolated, a spectacle for others to whisper about. My hands trembled in my lap as I fought back tears. If only Richard were still alive. My husband had been the buffer between Caroline and me for so many years. Since his death 3 years ago, the delicate truce had completely unraveled. From across the room, I caught Caroline's eye. She raised her champagne glass slightly in my direction, her smile cool and satisfied. She thought she knew everything about why her father had left when she was 12. She thought I was the reason her childhood had been broken. How carefully. I had constructed that lie to protect her. How completely it had backfired. All these years I'd carried the weight of her hatred to shield her from a truth that would have shattered her. Ronald hadn't left because of my impossible temperament, as Caroline believed. He'd left because his 24-year-old secretary was pregnant, and he'd chosen his new family over us. I watched Caroline laughing with her husband, watched Amber beaming beside her fiancé Drew, and felt the familiar hollowness in my chest. How different might our relationship have been if I'd told the truth? If I hadn't shouldered the blame to protect a child from the knowledge that her father had simply stopped loving us? The waiters began serving dinner. My table remained empty except for me, a calculated humiliation. I picked at my food, unable to taste anything through the lump in my throat. When the speeches began, I quietly gathered my things. No one noticed as I slipped out through the side door into the cool evening air. What they would notice, however, was what I would do next. Because after 30 years of protecting Caroline from the truth, I'd finally reached my breaking point. If she wanted to paint me as the villain, I'd show her just how ruinous I could be. Monday morning, I made a single phone call. By afternoon, Amber's honeymoon reservations at the exclusive Santiago Bay Resort in the Dominican Republic were canceled. They didn't know that Ronald owned that resort now. They didn't know they had nearly walked straight into the arms of the man who had abandoned us, the man who had started a whole new family while leaving his first one behind. They didn't know. But they would soon enough. The morning after the engagement party, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the offensive place card I'd saved from the night before. The morning light streaming through the curtains seemed to intensify the elegant script. The old shrew who always ruins everything. My hands trembled as I placed it back in my purse. Evidence, perhaps, of what they truly thought of me. My modest home in the suburbs had grown quieter since Richard passed. The silence used to bother me, but now I found comfort in it. No judgment. Ear. No cold stares or whispered comments. The phone rang, shattering my thoughts. Caroline's name flashed on the caller ID. My stomach tightened as I answered. "Mother," she began, her voice already sharp with irritation. "You left early last night." "Yes," I said simply, without saying goodbye to anyone. Amber noticed. I doubted that very much. "I wasn't feeling well." "You're never feeling well when it matters, are you?" The familiar accusation in her tone made my chest ache. "Just like when Dad left. Suddenly you were too sick to explain anything properly." The memory crashed over me like a wave. Caroline at 12 standing in our living room, demanding to know where her father had gone. My own heart shattered into 1,000 pieces as I tried to protect her from the brutal truth. "Caroline, that was 30 years ago," I said quietly. "And you're still the same selfish woman," she snapped. "Do you know what Dad told me before he left? That he couldn't stand living with someone so negative and cold. The lie I had allowed Ronald to tell? The lie I had maintained to protect Caroline? From knowing her father had simply replaced us with a younger model." "Is that what you really believe?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's what everyone knows, Mother. Why do you think Amber doesn't want you involved in the wedding planning? Your bitterness poisons everything." After she hung up, I moved to my bedroom closet, reaching for the locked box I kept on the top shelf. My hands shook as I entered the combination, Caroline's birthday, and lifted the lid. Inside lay the evidence I had hidden for 3 decades. Photographs of Ronald with his pregnant secretary Veronica, taken by the private investigator I'd hired when I first suspected the affair, the divorce papers stating his intent to remarry, which I'd never shown Caroline. The property records of the small hotel in the Dominican Republic he had purchased with his family money. Money that should have been Caroline's inheritance. Most damning of all, the letter he'd written me just before he left. "Natalie, I know this will hurt you, but I can't pretend anymore. Veronica is pregnant, and I'm going to stand by her. I know I'm supposed to feel terrible about this, but the truth is, I feel alive for the first time in years. I've transferred enough money to support you and Caroline until she finishes high school. My lawyer will handle the rest. I'm moving to the Dominican Republic to start fresh. Please don't try to contact me. It will only make things harder for Caroline. If she asks, tell her whatever you think best. Tell her I'm a bastard who abandoned you both. Tell her I couldn't handle family, life, whatever story will hurt her least, Ronald. And I had chosen a story, one that placed all the blame on me. Your father couldn't live with me anymore, sweetheart. I made him unhappy." It seemed kinder than the truth. Better that she hate me than know her father had simply stopped loving her. Over the years, the lie calcified. Caroline grew more distant, more resentful. When she got engaged, Ronald sent a congratulatory note but didn't attend the wedding. "Because Mom would ruin it," Caroline had said. When Amber was born, I thought perhaps the joy of a new generation might heal old wounds. But Caroline's bitterness had only transferred to her daughter. For 30 years, I'd carried Ronald's secret. I'd let my daughter believe I was cold, difficult, impossible to love, all to protect her from the reality that her father had abandoned her for a new family, a family he seemed to love more than he'd ever loved us, and now Amber and Drew were planning to honeymoon at Santiago Bay Resort, the very place Ronald had built with his new family, now a thriving luxury destination. If they went there, they would inevitably discover the truth. The resort's main restaurant was called Veronica's. The hotel lobby displayed photos of the owner, Ronald, with his wife and their 3 children, Caroline's half-siblings she didn't even know existed. I stared at the phone in my hand, my decision to cancel their reservation suddenly crystal clear. I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I was still, after all these years, trying to protect my daughter and granddaughter from a painful truth. But perhaps it was time for the protection to end. Perhaps it was time for everyone to know what really happened 30 years ago. I carefully replaced the documents in the lockbox, except for the photos and Ronald's letter. These I placed in an envelope. If Caroline and Amber wanted to know why I'd canceled the honeymoon reservation, I would finally tell them the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, I'd been the villain in their story, the shrew who ruins everything. But I'd accepted that role to protect Caroline from an even more painful narrative, that she simply hadn't been important enough for her father to stay. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Amber just heard from the resort, the honeymoon. Reservation was canceled. Please tell me you had nothing to do with this. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. After 30 years of lies and sacrifice, I was tired of being the villain in a story I hadn't written. We need to talk, I typed back. There's something you and Amber need to know about Santiago Bay Resort and your father. The incessant pounding on my front door startled me awake from an uneasy nap. I'd barely slept the night before. Memories and regrets circling like vultures after my decision to cancel Amber's honeymoon reservation. Open this door right now. Caroline's voice cut through the quiet afternoon, sharp and demanding. I took a steadying breath, smoothing down my cardigan before opening the door. Caroline burst in, Amber following close behind. Their matching expressions of fury might have been comical if they weren't directed at me with such intensity. How dare you? Caroline's face was flushed with anger. How could you possibly think you had the right to cancel Amber's honeymoon? The resort called to confirm the cancellation. Came from you, Amber added, her voice trembling with rage. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Drew's parents paid a deposit we might not get back. I gestured toward the living room. Please, sit down. I need to explain something. There's nothing to explain, Caroline snapped. This is exactly why Dad left. You can't stand to see anyone happy. That familiar accusation, the one I'd allowed to fester for 3 decades, struck a nerve I thought had long gone numb. Caroline, I said quietly, that's not why your father left. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, not this again. I was there, remember? I saw how miserable you made him. You were 12, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. And you didn't see everything. I moved to the bookshelf where I'd placed the envelope containing Ronald's letter and the photographs. My hands trembled slightly as I handed it to Caroline. What's this supposed to be? She didn't open it, just held it with suspicion. The truth about why I canceled the honeymoon. The truth about your father. Amber stepped closer, curiosity momentarily, overriding her anger. What about Grandpa? I've never even met him. That's because he's been living in the Dominican Republic for the past 30 years, I said. At Santiago Bay Resort, the resort where you planned to honeymoon. Caroline's face paled slightly. What are you talking about? Dad moved back to Michigan after the divorce. I shook my head. That's what I let you believe. Open the envelope, Caroline. She hesitated, then tore it open with sharp, angry movements. The photograph slid out first. I watched her expression transform as she took in the images of Ronald with his pregnant secretary. The newspaper clipping announcing the opening of Santiago Bay Resort, with Ronald and Veronica prominently featured. The family portrait taken, some years later showing Ronald with Veronica and their 3 children. This can't be right, Caroline whispered, her voice suddenly small. Dad wouldn't. Read the letter, I said gently. Amber moved behind her mother, peering over her shoulder as Caroline unfolded Ronald's goodbye note. The silence in the room grew heavy as they read his words, the truth I'd protected them from for so long. Caroline looked up at me, her eyes swimming with confusion. He left because of her? Because she was pregnant? I nodded. He wanted a fresh start, a new family. But you always said, Caroline's voice cracked, you let me believe it was your fault, that you drove him away. It seemed kinder than the truth, I said quietly. What was I supposed to tell a 12-year-old girl? That her father chose another woman and her baby over us? That he didn't want to be your father anymore? Caroline sank into the nearest chair, the papers clutched in her trembling hands. All these years, she whispered, all these years, I blamed you. Amber stood frozen, processing the revelation that the grandfather she had never met had been running a luxury resort all this time. You canceled our honeymoon because Grandpa owns Santiago Bay? I nodded. I couldn't let you walk into that blindly. Imagine arriving at your honeymoon resort only to discover your grandfather working there with his other family. Amber's eyes widened with the realization. We would have seen him, met him, maybe even his other children. Your half-aunts and uncle, I confirmed quietly. He has 3 children with Veronica. Caroline pushed herself up from the chair, pacing the room, like a caged animal. Why didn't you ever tell me? 30 years, Mom. 30 years of letting me believe you were the villain in this story. I met her gaze steadily. Because you adored your father. Because every child deserves to believe they're loved. Because the truth would have devastated you. So instead you let me hate you? Caroline's voice broke on the last word. You sacrificed our relationship to protect him? To protect you, I corrected softly. Not him. Never him. Amber sank onto the couch, the anger draining from her face. The place card at the engagement party, she whispered, shame coloring her cheeks. We called you a shrew. We said you ruin everything. I felt a profound weariness settle into my bones. I know what you think of me. What you've always thought. Caroline stared at the photographs again, her fingers tracing Ronald's face. All these years, she repeated, her voice hollow. Why tell us now? Because I'm tired, I admitted. Tired of being the villain in a story I didn't write. And because you deserved to know the truth before you accidentally stumbled upon it during what should be the happiest time of Amber's life. The silence stretched between us. 30 years of misunderstandings and blame hovering in the air like dust motes in the afternoon sunlight. Then Amber looked at me. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time. You've been protecting us all along, haven't you, Grandma? I need some air, Caroline said abruptly, pushing past me toward the front door. The photographs of Ronald and his second family fluttered to the floor as she fled. The screen door slammed behind her, leaving Amber and me in stunned silence. I bent down slowly, my knees protesting, to gather the scattered evidence of my 30-year deception. Amber watched me, her expression unreadable. I'll go after her, she finally said, rising from the couch. Give her time, I advised, carefully returning the photographs to their envelope. This isn't easy to process. Amber hesitated by the door. Did you ever think about telling us the truth before now? I sighed, feeling the weight of 3 decades pressing down on my shoulders. Many times. After your grandfather, after Richard, died, I almost told Caroline everything. But by then, the lie had taken on a life of its own. It seemed cruel to shatter her image of her father after so many years. So instead, you let us think you were the problem, Amber said, her tone accusatory, despite the new understanding in her eyes. It was a choice I made, I replied simply. Not the right one, perhaps, but it seemed right at the time. Amber shook her head slowly. I need to find Mom. After she left, I sank into my armchair, exhaustion seeping into my bones. Through the front window, I could see Caroline sitting in her car, her head resting against the steering wheel. Amber approached cautiously, tapping on the window. My daughter looked up, her face streaked with tears, and unlocked the door. I turned away, giving them their privacy. Some conversations weren't meant for me to hear. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence of my living room. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I'd just put on the kettle for tea when the front door opened again. Caroline entered first, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression composed. Amber followed, looking between us uncertainly. The 3 generations of women in my living room, each carrying the weight of Ronald's abandonment differently. Why did you keep paying the mortgage on this house after Dad left? Caroline asked, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. You worked 2 jobs. You never remarried until Richard, almost 15 years later. I blinked, surprised. By the question. This was your home. I wanted you to have stability. And college? My tuition? Ronald's support payments stopped when you turned 18. He'd promised to pay for college in the divorce settlement, but... I shrugged. I took out loans, worked overtime. Caroline stared at me. You told me Dad was helping with tuition. Another lie to protect you, I admitted. You were so excited about college. I didn't want you to feel abandoned all over again. All these years, Caroline whispered, I've been sending him Christmas cards, birthday cards. To the Michigan address you gave me, I nodded. I had a P.O. box forwarding service. When your father made it clear he wanted no contact, I thought it would hurt less if you believed he was still somewhat in your life. Caroline's expression hardened. Did he ever respond? Even once? The kettle whistled sharply, giving me a moment's reprieve before answering. No, I said finally, turning off the stove. He never did. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. I busied myself preparing tea, giving Caroline time to process. When I turned back, she was studying me with new eyes. You paid for my wedding, she said, slowly. You said Dad had sent the money, but... Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. I set the teacups on the table, avoiding her gaze. You deserved a beautiful wedding. Even though I blamed you for Dad not attending, Caroline said, her voice hollow. I told everyone it was because you 2 couldn't be in the same room. It seemed simpler that way. Simpler? Caroline's voice rose. You let me treat you like garbage for 30 years to protect a man who abandoned us both. I let you have a father you could believe in, I corrected gently, even if it was only an idea of him. Amber, who had been silently witnessing our exchange, suddenly straightened. Santiago Bay Resort, she said, pulling out her phone. I want to see it. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. Caroline and I watched as she pulled up the resort's website, navigating to the About Us section. There he was, Ronald, 30 years older but unmistakable, standing proudly with his arm around a still elegant Veronica. 3 adult children surrounded them, all bearing a striking resemblance to Caroline. My half-siblings, Caroline whispered, taking the phone from Amber's hand. I have brothers and sisters I never knew about. 2 sisters and a brother, I confirmed, quietly. Madison, Elise, and Jackson. Caroline's head snapped up. You know their names? I kept track over the years, just in case you ever wanted to know. In case I wanted to know? Caroline's laugh was brittle. How could I want to know about people I didn't know existed? I had no answer for that. Amber took back her phone, scrolling through more photos. There's a restaurant named after her, Veronica's. She looked up, at me. We would have eaten there. We might have met him without even realizing who he was. That's why I canceled your reservation, I said. I couldn't let you stumble into that unprepared. Caroline paced the small kitchen, her hands clenched, into fists. All these years, I thought. I believed. She stopped suddenly, turning to face me. The place card at the engagement party. The old shrew who always ruins everything. God, Mom, we were so cruel to you. You didn't know, I said simply. I should have, Caroline insisted, her voice breaking. I should have seen that you were protecting me. Instead, I made you the villain in my story. I taught Amber to do the same. Amber lowered her eyes, shame coloring her cheeks. I'm sorry, Grandma. We have to call him, Caroline said suddenly. I need to hear him say it. I need to hear him admit what he did. I felt a flicker of alarm. Caroline, it's been 30 years. What good would it do? What good? Her eyes flashed. He abandoned us, Mom. He started a whole new family and never looked back. Meanwhile, you worked yourself to exhaustion to give me a normal life, and I repaid you with decades of resentment. He doesn't get to just get away with that. Amber placed a hand on her mother's arm. Mom, do you really want to confront him right before my wedding? Caroline hesitated, then her shoulders slumped. No, you're right. This is about you, not my childhood trauma. But the determination in her eyes told me this conversation wasn't over. After 30 years of silence, the truth was finally out, and its consequences were only beginning to unfold. The week following my revelation passed in a strange, tense silence. Caroline stopped returning my calls, and Amber responded to my texts with polite but distant replies. I wasn't surprised. They needed time to process 30 years of lies, even if those lies had been meant to protect them. What did surprise me was the knock on my door Saturday afternoon. When I opened it, there stood Drew, Amber's fiancé, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Bennet, he said formally. May I come in? I stepped aside, curious about this unexpected visit. Drew had always been polite but reserved around me, clearly influenced by Amber and Caroline's perception of me as difficult and bitter. Amber doesn't know I'm here, he said, settling into my living room. Neither does Caroline. I see, I replied, carefully. Is everything all right with the wedding plans? Drew ran a hand through his dark hair, a nervous gesture I'd noticed before. That's actually why I'm here. Amber's been different since your conversation last week. She told me everything. About her grandfather, the resort, your sacrifice. I felt a jolt of surprise. Amber had confided in him. She's been questioning everything, Drew continued. The way she's treated you, the things Caroline told her about you. She's torn up about that place card at the engagement party. It was just a card, I said, though we both knew it had been much more, a symbol of years of misconceptions and resentment. Drew shook his head. It was cruel. And now she knows it was also undeserved. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Mrs. Bennet, we've rescheduled our honeymoon. Different resort, different country. But there's something else we'd like to change. I waited, uncertain where this was heading. Amber wants you to play a bigger role in the wedding. She's too ashamed to ask you herself right now. But she hopes. Drew paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. She hopes you might consider doing a reading during the ceremony, something important to you. The request caught me off guard. After years of being pushed to the margins of family events, This invitation to step into the spotlight felt almost unsettling. "She's afraid you'll say no," Drew added. "After how you've been treated, she wouldn't blame you." I thought about it for a long moment. "I'd be honored," I said finally. "Thank you for coming to tell me." Drew smiled, seeming relieved. "There's one more thing. Caroline. She's not handling this well. She went to see a therapist yesterday. She's talking about confronting Ronald." A cold weight settled in my stomach. She's going to call him? "She found his email address on the resort website," Drew confirmed. "She hasn't sent anything yet, but she's drafting something. She feels like she needs answers." After Drew left, I sat in my quiet house, mind racing. Caroline confronting Ronald could open wounds that might never heal. Yet, wasn't that exactly what I'd done by maintaining the lie for so many years? Created a wound that festered beneath the surface, poisoning our relationship? My phone rang just after dinner. Caroline's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately. "Mom?" Her voice sounded raw, exhausted. "I need to ask you something." "Anything," I said. "Did Dad ever ask about me? After he left?" The question squeezed my heart. "In the beginning," I said carefully. "He called a few times to check that the money had arrived, asked if you were adjusting. And later?" I closed my eyes, remembering the gradual tapering of contact until there was nothing. "No, sweetheart, I'm sorry." Caroline was quiet for a long moment. "I wrote to him," she finally said. "I told him, I know everything. I told him about the wedding, about how I treated you all these years because of his lies." My breath caught. "Caroline." "I needed to do it, Mom," she said firmly. "I needed him to know that I know who he really is, who you really are." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me feared Ronald's response would only hurt Caroline more, but another part recognized that she needed this closure. "There's something else," Caroline continued. "I want to change the wedding seating arrangement." 3 days later, Ronald's reply arrived in Caroline's inbox. She called me immediately, her voice tight with emotion. "He wants to meet," she said without preamble. "He's flying up next week. He says he wants to explain in person." My heart raced with anxiety. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd meet him, that I'd listen." Her voice hardened. "But that's all I promised." "Do you want me there?" I asked cautiously. "I need you there," Caroline replied, surprising me. "I've spent 30 years blaming you for his absence. I want him to look us both in the eye when he explains why he abandoned us." The meeting was set for Wednesday afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. I arrived early, hands trembling slightly as I ordered tea. Caroline joined me minutes later, her face pale but composed. "Are you sure about this?" I asked gently. She nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. "I need to do this. For me. For Amber." We sat in tense silence, watching the door. Then suddenly, there he was, Ronald. Older, grayer, but unmistakably the man who had walked out of our lives 3 decades before. He spotted us immediately, hesitating before approaching our table. His eyes met mine first, a flicker of something like shame crossing his features before he turned to Caroline. "You look just like your mother," he said softly. Caroline's composure cracked slightly. "Sit down," she said, her voice clipped. Ronald settled awkwardly into the chair across from us. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "I didn't do it for you," Caroline replied. "I did it for me. For 30 years I believed Mom drove you away. I blamed her for breaking our family. I want to hear you admit that was a lie." Ronald glanced between us, discomfort evident in every line of his body. "It was complicated." "No," Caroline cut him off sharply. "It wasn't complicated. You got your secretary pregnant and abandoned us. You let me believe Mom was the reason you left. That's not complicated. That's cowardice. I reached for Caroline's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. Her fingers clutched mine with surprising strength. Ronald's shoulders slumped. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I was a coward. I took the easy way out." "And now?" Caroline demanded. "Why agree to meet us after all this time?" Ronald looked at me, then back to Caroline. "Because I owe you both the truth, and because—" He hesitated. "Because your email made me realize how much damage my lies have done." For the first time in 30 years, I looked directly at the man who had shattered our family and whispered, "It's time for you to tell her everything." The church was filled with flowers and soft music as guests settled into their seats. From the small side room where I waited, I could hear the gentle murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. Amber's wedding day had arrived, and against all odds, I was part of it. I smoothed down the silk of my pale blue dress, a gift from Caroline, and touched the silver locket at my throat. Inside was a small photograph of Caroline as a child, her smile bright and untainted by the pain that would come later. A reminder of why I had made the choices I did, for better or worse. The door opened, and Caroline appeared, resplendent in her mother-of-the-bride dress. "It's almost time," she said. "Are you ready?" "As I'll ever be," I replied, rising from my chair. The month since our confrontation with Ronald had transformed our relationship in ways I never thought possible. He had finally told Caroline everything, not just about Veronica and the pregnancy, but about his own failings as a husband and father. He admitted manipulating the narrative to make me the villain, knowing I would accept the blame to protect Caroline. Most surprising of all, he had apologized. Not just empty words, but a genuine acknowledgement of the damage he had caused. It couldn't erase 30 years of absence, but it had given Caroline something she desperately needed: the truth. "Amber wants to see you before we start," Caroline said, leading me down the hall to the bridal suite. My granddaughter stood before a full-length mirror, radiant in her wedding gown. When she saw me in the reflection, she turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Grandma," she said softly, crossing the room to embrace me. "You look beautiful." I held her carefully, mindful of her dress. "Not as beautiful as you, my dear." Amber pulled back, reaching for something on the vanity. "I have something for you." She placed a small box in my hands. A thank you. And an apology. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with 3 intertwined circles. "The 3 of us," Amber explained. "You, Mom, me, connected no matter what." My throat tightened with emotion. "It's perfect." "I'm so sorry," Amber whispered. "For the place card. For all the years we misunderstood you." "That's in the past now," I said, squeezing her hand. "Today is about your future." Caroline helped me fasten the bracelet, our eyes meeting in the mirror. So much had changed between us, the wall of resentment crumbling to reveal what had always been beneath. Love, complicated but enduring. "We should take our places," Caroline said. "The ceremony will start soon." As we moved toward the door, Amber called out, "Grandma, thank you for protecting us all these years, even when we didn't deserve it." The wedding proceeded beautifully. I sat in the front row, not isolated, at the back or in a separate hallway, but right where the mother of the bride's mother belonged. When the time came for my reading, I approached the podium with steady steps, drawing strength from Caroline's encouraging smile. "Love is patient, love is kind," I began, the familiar words taking on new meaning. As I read, I looked out at the gathered faces, Drew's parents nodding approvingly, Amber and Drew holding hands at the altar, Caroline wiping away a tear. And in the back row, a face I hadn't expected to see, Ronald, who had been invited by Caroline in a gesture of forgiveness I still didn't fully understand. After the ceremony, during the reception, I found myself momentarily alone at my table. No longer the old shrew who ruins everything, but grandmother of the bride, elegantly printed on a place card positioned at one of the best tables in the room. "May I join you?" Caroline asked, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. I nodded, accepting one of the glasses. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Amber and Drew's first dance. "I saw that Dad came," I said finally. Caroline nodded. "I thought it was important, for closure." She turned to face me. "He's not staying long. This isn't his place anymore. But I needed him to see what he missed, what you never missed, despite everything we put you through." I sipped my champagne, unsure how to respond. Caroline reached into her evening bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this when I was looking through old photos for the wedding slideshow," she said, handing it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It was a Mother's Day card from Caroline, made when she was about 9, before Ronald left, before everything fell apart. In a child's uneven handwriting, "To the best mom ever. I love you more than anybody in the whole world." "I meant it then," Caroline said quietly. "And I mean it now. It just took me 30 years to remember." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the card. "I never stopped loving you, Caroline. Not for a single day. I know that now." She covered my hand with hers. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for lost time." Later, as the evening wound down, Amber approached our table. "They're about to cut the cake," she announced, then hesitated. "I was hoping. Would you both join us? The photographer wants a picture of the 3 generations." Caroline and I exchanged glances, then rose together. As we followed Amber to where Drew waited with the multi-tiered cake, I caught sight of us reflected in one of the ballroom's mirrored walls. 3 women bound by blood and history, by mistakes, and forgiveness. The photographer positioned us carefully. Amber in the center with Drew, Caroline and I flanking them. "Family photo!" he called cheerfully, unaware of the weight those simple words carried. Family. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and whole in a way we hadn't been for 3 decades. As I smiled for the camera, I felt Caroline's arm slip. Around my waist, heard Amber's laughter as Drew pretended to smear frosting on her nose. In that moment, I realized the true price of my silence had been paid in full, and what I'd received in return was worth every painful year. Later that night, alone in my house, I opened the wedding program I'd saved. Inside was the new seating chart for the reception, with my name prominently displayed at table 1. But what caught my eye was the small note Amber had handwritten beneath it. "For my grandmother, Natalie Bennett, whose love and sacrifice taught me what family really means. Not the woman who ruins everything, but the woman who saved us all." I traced the words with my finger, 30 years of pain finally giving way to peace. The secret had cost us dearly, but the truth had set us free. And in the end, that freedom was worth everything.